From New York, this is Democracy Now!
This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country.
After Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell pushes for a vote on the Green New Deal, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez calls the move a bluff vote. We'll look at what the proposal is for a Green New Deal with Rihanna Gunn-Wright, one of the lead policy writers for the deal. Then after two deadly crashes, the Senate holds hearings on how the Federal Aviation Administration lets the airline industry regulate itself and whether to approve a former lobbyist to head the Interior Department. We'll look at regulatory capture with Public Citizen's Rob Weissman.
The more we learn, the more we're finding out that the FAA is captured and controlled by Boeing, the company it's supposed to be regulating. That's not a unique situation. Corporations in all sectors tend to control their regulators. Well, when regulators fail, people die.
Then, as neo-Nazi James Alex Fields pleads guilty to 29 counts of hate crimes in a federal court for plowing his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville, killing one, we'll speak with Stanford professor Jennifer Eberhardt about her new book, Biased, uncovering the hidden prejudice that shapes what we see, think, and do.
What happened in Charlottesville is something, that's happening to some extent all over the country. We're sort of struggling and sort of contending with race in both new and old ways.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Executives at Boeing have tacitly admitted that software in the company's 737 MAX airplanes may have played a role in two recent deadly crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia. On Wednesday, Boeing executives laid out plans for new software updates to the 737 MAX plane, giving pilots more control of the aircraft. Many aviation security experts believe faulty autopilot software was to blame for the crashes of Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, which killed a combined 346 people, all people on both flights. This comes after the New York Times reported both those flights lacked optional safety features that could have prevented the deaths. On Capitol Hill, acting FAA Administrator Daniel Elwell on Wednesday defended his agency's oversight of Boeing. He was questioned by Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey.
I find it hard to believe that a safety company like an airline would save a couple $1,000s on an option that might improve safety on a
it may be hard for you to believe, but it's happening.
As the Wall Street Journal reports, Boeing sought to accelerate the development of the 737 MAX jet by lobbying to reduce regulatory scrutiny while requiring as little new training for pilots as possible. We'll have more on Boeing later in the broadcast. A federal judge has struck down rules in Kentucky and Arkansas requiring Medicaid recipients to work in order to receive health care under the federally funded program. Under the state's Medicaid work requirements, which were encouraged by the Trump administration, all, quote, able-bodied adults who get health insurance through the Affordable Care Act Medicaid expansion are required to prove that they're working, studying, or volunteering. On Wednesday, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg ruled the requirements were arbitrary and capricious and said they exceeded Medicaid's mission to provide health coverage to the needy. The ruling could affect 6 other states that impose similar rules and 7 other states who've applied for Medicaid work requirements. At the U.S.-Mexico border, Customs and Border Protection says it'll reassign hundreds of agents to the port of entry in El Paso as the agency faces a surge of Central American migrants seeking asylum in the U.S. The announcement came as CBP confirmed that hundreds of migrant families, they confined them behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire in the parking lot of an El Paso Border Patrol station. This is immigrant rights activist Christy Velez.
We're here to protest the inhumane conditions that the families are being kept in under this bridge. They're being kept behind cages and in tents, and the mothers are being treated very badly, the families are being treated very badly, and the children are being treated very badly. This is no condition to keep families and babies, and the rhetoric that's being spread about these families is completely untrue, and it's inhumane.
President Trump told a meeting of Republican lawmakers Tuesday that Puerto Rico has received too much aid since Hurricane Maria devastated the island. Senator Marco Rubio told reporters Trump said the aid, quote, is a way out of proportion to what Texas and Florida and others have gotten. His comments came as Democratic lawmakers said more aid for Puerto Rico must be included in a $13 to $14 billion disaster aid package being pushed by Republicans. A study by the Universities of Michigan and Utah found federal aid to Puerto Rico was slower and less generous after Hurricane Maria than federal aid received by Texas and Florida after Hurricanes Harvey and Irma. President Trump has still not acknowledged that more than 3,000 people died in Puerto Rico after the hurricane. In Florida, authorities have identified a second survivor of the February 2018 Parkland mass shooting, who died by suicide this month. 16-year-old Calvin Desir took his own life Saturday, just days after 19-year-old Sydney Aiello also died by suicide. 17 students, staff, and teachers were killed in Parkland on Valentine's Day last year in one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. If you or someone you love is in crisis, you can reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. On Capitol Hill, some Democratic lawmakers are calling on the Trump administration to rescind new rules that make it easier for U.S. weapons manufacturers to sell grenades, flamethrowers, and semi-automatic rifles overseas. Under the new rules, gun makers no longer need to be licensed by the State Department to sell weapons like the AR-15 to foreign buyers, and will instead need only a far easier-to-obtain license from the Commerce Department. On Tuesday, Minnesota Democrat freshman Congressmember Ilhan Omar took up the issue at a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing. She was questioning Jeff Abramson of the Arms Control Association.
On March 15th of this year, there was a shooting at a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, that left 50 people dead. The shooter was armed with 5 guns, 2 of which were semi-automatic rifles. Is it your understanding that this policy would make it easier for American manufacturers to export that weapon?
Indeed, that's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
This comes as an undercover investigation by Al Jazeera English found officials with the National Rifle Association gave advice to members of Australia's far-right One Nation Party on their campaign to overturn Australia's strict gun control laws enacted after a mass shooting in 1996. This is an NRA media liaison speaking in Washington, D.C. to members of the One Nation Party in a secretly recorded video.
You have somebody who maybe leans to your side that worked at a newspaper, or maybe was covering City Hall or a crime reporter. We want to print up stories about people who were robbed, had their homes invasion, beaten, whatever it might be, that could have been helped had they had a gun. And that's going to be the angle on your stories. And that's what he's got to write. He's got to put out 2 to 5 of those a week.
Meanwhile, HuffPost is reporting an official with the National Rifle Association corresponded with a prominent Sandy Hook conspiracy theorist to call into question the school shooting in Parkland, Florida last year. In an email obtained by the Huffington Post, NRA program coordinator Mark Richardson wrote to the conspiracy theorist Wolfgang Halbig just one day after the massacre, quote, "Just like Sandy Hook, there's so much more to the story. The Parkland shooter was not alone," he wrote. The email was made public as part of the discovery process in a lawsuit by parents of victims of the Sandy Hook massacre against Alex Jones and his website InfoWars. Jones, a far-right conspiracy theorist who's denied that 20 school children and 6 adults were killed in the 2012 mass shooting at Sandy Hook, calling survivors of the massacre crisis actors. In Virginia, self-described neo-Nazi James Alex Fields pleaded guilty Wednesday to 29 counts of hate crimes in a federal court for plowing his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville in August 2017. As part of the deal, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Last December, a Virginia jury sentenced Fields to life in prison for murdering anti-fascist protester Heather Heyer and injuring 28 others at the counter-protest of the white supremacist Unite the Right rally. Facebook said Wednesday it has banned white nationalism and white separatism from its social media network. Facebook says it will redirect users trying to engage in such content to a page for the nonprofit Life After Hate, which seeks to help people leave hate groups. In Texas, a Houston area county official is under fire after he criticized a judge for speaking Spanish on television. On March 25th, Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo was giving updates in both English and Spanish about a chemical fire that was burning at a petrochemical plant in the Houston suburb of Deer Park. The press conference was carried live on the Facebook page of Houston CBS affiliate KHOU, where Mark Tice, Chambers County Commissioner, posted the comment, quote, "She's a joke. English, this is not Mexico," he said. Following a public uproar, Tice later apologized. Census data shows Harris County is 43% Latino, and nearly half its residents speak a language other than English at home. Back in the United States, a New York City suburb has banned children who are not vaccinated against measles from schools, markets, and other public spaces amidst one of the worst U.S. outbreaks in decades of the sometimes fatal disease. Rockland County Executive Ed Day said the ban will target parents who refuse to give their children the MMR vaccine against measles, mumps, and rubella.
Effective at the stroke of midnight tonight, March 27th, anyone who is under 18 years of age and is unvaccinated against the measles will be barred from public places until the declaration expires in 30 days or until they receive at least their first shot of MMR.
The order will affect an estimated 6,000 unvaccinated children and their families. The outbreak, which has seen at least 150 people infected with measles since last October, has mostly been confined to Rockland County's Orthodox Jewish community, which has particularly low vaccination rates. In California, a federal jury ordered Monsanto to pay over $80 million to a cancer survivor whose illness was found to have been partly caused by the herbicide Roundup. 70-year-old Edwin Hardman says he sprayed the widely used herbicide on his property for almost 3 decades and once got the product directly on his skin. He's been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The jury's award could have implications for hundreds of others accusing the company of making them sick. And the Trump administration is struggling to justify its plans to cut federal funding to the Special Olympics and other programs benefiting students with disabilities, while spending tens of millions more to fund charter schools and higher salaries at the Department of Education. Under President Trump's 2020 budget plan, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos proposed zeroing out funding for the Special Olympics, the 3rd year in a row she's made such a request. This is Betsy DeVos being questioned Tuesday by Wisconsin Democratic Congressmember Mark Pocan.
Do you know how many kids are going to be affected by that cut, Madam Secretary?
Mr. Pocan, let me just say again, we had to make some difficult decisions with this budget.
Again, this is a question of how many kids, not about the budget.
I don't know the number of kids.
It's 272,000 kids. That's all. I'll answer it for you. That's okay. No problem. It's 272,000 kids that are affected.
Is an awesome organization, one that is well supported by the philanthropic sector as well.
Sure.
As of Thursday morning, a move-on petition asking DeVos to reverse plans to cut programs for Special Olympics had gathered nearly 100,000 signatures. Last year, Congress allocated about $17.6 million to the Special Olympics. The Washington Post reports that figure is roughly equivalent to the amount taxpayers allocated to President Trump's last 5 trips to his Gulf resort in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Senate on Tuesday rejected the Green New Deal after 43 Democrats voted present on the measure introduced by Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. 4 other Democrats joined all 53 Republican senators in voting against the Green New Deal. Democrats, including the bill's champion, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, blasted McConnell's move to push the procedural vote, calling it, quote, bluff vote. The Green New Deal seeks to transform the U.S. economy through funding renewable energy while ending U.S. carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. Democratic leaders have resisted backing the deal, which has the support of all 2020 Democratic presidential hopefuls in Congress.
On Tuesday, Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah ridiculed the Green New Deal. During a 14-minute speech on the Senate floor, he showed a series of fantastical images that included former President Ronald Reagan riding a dinosaur and Aquaman on a giant purple seahorse. Lee also evokes Luke Skywalker from Star Wars riding a tauntaun, a mythical snow lizard, to belittle the Green New Deal. This is parts of Lee's speech.
I rise today to consider the Green New Deal with the seriousness it deserves. This is, of course, a picture of former President Ronald Reagan naturally firing a machine gun while riding on the back of a dinosaur. This image has as much to do with overcoming communism in the 20th century as the Green New Deal has to do with overcoming climate change in the 21st. Tauntauns, Mr. President, while perhaps not as efficient in some ways as airplanes or as snowmobiles, these hairy bipedal species of space lizards offer their own unique benefits. All residents of Hawaii would be left with is this. This is a picture of Aquaman. I draw your attention, Mr. President, to the 20-foot impressive seahorse he's riding. Under the Green New Deal, this is probably Hawaii's best bet.
On Twitter, Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez accused Senator Lee of not taking his job seriously. She wrote to her followers, quote, "If this guy can be senator, you can do anything." This is Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez speaking on the Senate floor in a clip that has been watched more than 10 million times.
When we talk about the concern of the environment as an elitist concern, 1 year ago, I was waitressing in a taco shop in downtown Manhattan. I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. Tell that to the families in Flint, whose kids have their blood is ascending in lead levels. Their brains are damaged for the rest of their lives. Call them elitist. You're telling them that those kids are trying to get on a plane to Davos? People are dying.
That's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Well, for more, we're joined right now by Brianna Gunn-Wright, one of the lead policy writers for the Green New Deal. She's the policy director for the nonprofit New Consensus. Brianna Gunn-Wright, welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us.
It's wonderful to be here.
Before you explain exactly what the Green New Deal is and what you are working on leading to 2020, can you explain what happened in the Senate this week? What was this procedural vote that Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called a bluff vote? She called it a sham. What happened, and why did the Democrats abstain?
Right. So Mitch McConnell, or I should say Majority Leader McConnell, decided that he wanted to do this vote a while back when the Green New Deal started to pick up steam. And this was the fruition. It actually got pushed back once or twice. And from my estimation, I focus on policy, so I'm not an expert on the political side, was that it was really an effort to embarrass embarrass Democrats, to show cracks in support for the Green New Deal, and essentially to try to stop the momentum. And my understanding of the Democratic response was that there is deep interest in the Senate in keeping the momentum of the Green New Deal going. But some members don't want to vote on it until there's more policy. So this was the middle path that they chose in order to still allow the Green New Deal to develop policy to grow legs and to continue moving forward.
Well, what do you know about what Democrats at the moment, what their opposition to the Green New Deal is?
Largely, it's that the resolution is a non-binding resolution that sets out goals and doesn't have policy specifics right now. And so that is the main opposition in my understanding. I think there's some fears also about cost and feasibility from particular senators. But I think it's also important to recognize that all of the senators who are currently running for president have backed the Green New Deal. And of course, Senator Markey has been a champion and is a veteran climate hawk. So there's definitely pronounced support in the Senate, but there's also some reservation. So
this, what happened with the voting down of it and all the Democrats' abstentions, that doesn't mean that they do not support the Green New Deal. So explain what it is. What's the resolution that Congressmember Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey put forward, and what is still in process? What is evolving?
So the resolution that came out set out high-level goals for the Green New Deal, and in a lot of ways it was meant to be a marker in the sand to say these are the goals of the Green New Deal, these are the projects that are part of the Green New Deal, and this is the approach that the Green New Deal has to take, particularly around issues of equity and justice. So that's what the resolution sets out, and it was always meant to be a floor, to be a marker. And so what's happening now, and a lot of the work that we're doing at New Consensus, is the policy development. We now have the goals, we have the projects, so we're trying to figure out, along with a cadre of experts involved in movement, policy, and academia, what is a smart path forward on all of these goals, and how do we actually achieve the things set out in the resolution?
Well, I want to talk about one of the issues that you raised about people's concerns about the Green New Deal, namely expense, including Democrats. Last month, California Senator Dianne Feinstein came under fire after a video showing her interaction with a group of youth climate activists, some as young as 7 years old, went viral. In the video, Feinstein dismisses the students' demands to take action on climate change, including supporting the Green New Deal. Let's go to part of that exchange.
We're trying to promote the Green New Deal.
Well, there are reasons why I can't, because there's no way to pay for it.
Yes, there is.
We have tons of money going to the military. A lot of it is going to the military.
Well, I understand that. The United States government does a lot of things with the money, and they're important things. And you just can't go in and say, okay, we're going to take hundreds of millions from here and hundreds of millions from there. It just doesn't work that way.
So that's Senator Dianne Feinstein speaking last month. Brianna, can you talk about what exactly is the expense of the Green New Deal? And even more, what's the expense of not acting on the Green New Deal?
So the expense of the Green New Deal is largely unknown because there are no policy specifics. But there is plenty of research and evidence about the cost of deep decarbonization, which is exactly what the Green New Deal sets out, and also the benefits from green jobs. So one smaller green jobs report that Professor Robert Pollin put out recognizes, and it's far smaller in scope than the GND, and for that it was 2.7 million net jobs created. So, and most analyses of green jobs, especially if you're going to go complete net zero, you see millions of jobs. Similarly, on the cost side, deep decarbonization grows our economy. Rocky Mountain Institute they say that it will grow the economy, deep decarbonization, 2.5 times the American economy and save $5 trillion. So there are studies not from us out there about what these things cost to implement, and also the benefits and the savings that come. On the cost of not implementing it, Those are more known, but there's a lot of questions because a lot of those estimates actually, we don't know all of the second order effects, so the cost will likely be greater. But last year, NASA found that the U.S. economy lost $91 billion to climate change alone. And there's other estimates that $500 billion, 2% of GDP, was lost from climate change.
And what about the fact that Republicans have been saying such bizarre things about the Green New Deal? I mean, we just saw, a dinosaur and a tauntaun and so on. So, what is that about, and how can you possibly combat that?
Right. Well, the reality is they're not taking this seriously. They're not taking this threat seriously. And the ways that we combat that, at least at New Consensus and in the context of the Green New Deal, is being willing to work with everyone, but also not pegging our hopes or our vision to Republican talking points or Republican solutions on climate, which clearly, if you're showing dinosaurs, there are none.
President Trump told Fox News Wednesday that he wants to campaign against the Green New Deal, so he doesn't want it killed off right away.
I don't want to speak badly about the new Green Deal, Sean, because, frankly, I'm afraid that they'll stop using it because I really do want to, campaign against it. It's ridiculous. All right. It's crazy. And it'll cost $100 trillion. Nobody knows what that means. That means it's more money than you have in the world. And it will be catastrophic. It's not going to happen. It's just talk.
It's not going to happen. It's just talk, Rihanna Gunn-Wright. So tell us the substance of it, and not only the science of the Green New Deal, but also the issues of, for example, how you're going to address the racial wealth disparity and why you see that connected to a Green New Deal.
Well, there's a couple reasons that we see that as connected to the Green New Deal. One is, of course, a moral argument. A lot of the people who are dying from fossil fuel pollution or who are carrying the heaviest burden are people of color, and they're poor people of color. And likely when climate change picks up and we see more disasters, more deaths, those are the first people who are on the line. People like to say climate change will kill us all, but the truth is climate change will kill some people first. And so there's a moral imperative to make sure that in the green transition, the same people who bear the brunt of our reliance on fossil fuels are not the same people who the green transition is being built on their backs. So that's one. And then the second is that income inequality and climate change are linked, not only because we have an extractive economy, but because there's a growing body of evidence that, especially in rich countries, the higher you have income inequality, the more emissions that you have. The mechanisms are not clear, and there's lots of theories about it, but the evidence is clear. And so if you're going to tackle climate change and tackle it in a way that's sustainable, you have to be talking about inequity. You have to be talking about racial equity as well, because those are drivers, right? And the ways that we think about addressing that is making sure that the policies are cross-cutting, right? And so, say one of the examples in the bill is upgrading all homes and buildings. You can structure that program through federal jobs guarantees, through local programs, through incubators, and just through the structure of how you split up the work between different types of buildings to make sure that people of color are benefiting. And another way that we're constantly thinking about the racial wealth gap is how do you make sure that this transition brings not only income, but that income can be translated to wealth, particularly for people that are more likely to be unbanked. So those are the things that we're thinking about, and those are the reasons we think that it's incredibly important, right, to make sure that racial equity is involved. And also from past mobilizations like World War II and the New Deal, the other thing that we see is when certain people aren't involved or included, you see those effects for generations. And we don't want another set of problems that we're dealing with just kicking the can down the road.
We just have 15 seconds, but frontline communities, why this is so important, why your climate legislation is so different from others?
Right. Well, there's a couple reasons. Like I said, those people are the people who are most on the line, but But then the second, there's a political reason. People of color and folks in frontline communities are much more inclined to care about climate change. The issue is that they don't have the resources. They face a ton of existential threats that are not just climate. So if you can link the two and do it successfully while continuing to focus on deep decarbonization, you could open up a whole new bucket of climate voters in a situation where power, particularly when the GOP is so intransigent, is going to be crucial to passing any climate legislation, large or small.
Well, on Tuesday, Republican Representative Sean Duffy of Wisconsin suggested the Green New Deal only served the wealthy.
Focus on the rich, wealthy elites who will look at this and go, I love it because I've got big money in the bank. Everyone should do this. We should all sign on to it. But if you're a poor family just trying to make ends meet, it's a horrible idea.
Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York shot back with a passionate defense of the Green New Deal.
When we talk about the concern of the environment as an elitist concern, 1 year ago, I was waitressing in a taco shop in downtown Manhattan. I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. Tell that to the families in Flint, whose kids have their blood is ascending in lead levels. Their brains are damaged for the rest of their lives. Call them elitist. You're telling them that those kids are trying to get on a plane to Davos? People are dying. They are dying. And the response across the other side of the aisle is to introduce an amendment 5 minutes before a hearing in a markup. This is serious. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about our constituents and all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now, underwater. Farms, towns that will never be recovered and never come back. And we're here, and people are more concerned about helping oil companies than helping their own families? I don't think so. I don't think so. This is about our lives. This is about American lives. And it should not be partisan. Science should not be partisan. We are facing a national crisis. And if we do not ascend to that crisis, if we do not ascend to the levels in which we were threatened at the Great Depression, when we were threatened in World War II, if we do not ascend to those levels, if we tell the American public that we are more willing to invest and bail out big banks than we are willing to invest in our farmers and our urban families, then I don't know what we're here doing. I don't know what we're here doing. We talk about cost. We're going to pay for this whether we pass a Green New Deal or not. Because as towns and cities go underwater, as wildfires ravage our communities, we are going to pay. And we're either going to decide if we're going to pay to react or if we're going to pay to be proactive. And what we know is that prevention, when you spend less money on prevention, you can prevent a lot of that damage from happening in the first place. So it's not a question of whether we're going to spend the money, because I'm very sad to say that the government knew that climate change was real starting as far back as 1989 when NASA was reporting this. And the private sector knew way back in the 1970s. So we had until around the time I was born to address this issue. I wish it didn't have to cost so much, but I'm going to turn 30 this year, and for the entire 30 years of my lifetime, we did not make substantial investments to prepare our entire country for what we knew was coming. So now it's coming all up at the end. It's like when we live our whole lives and we don't eat healthily and we don't move and we pursue unhealthy activities. And then at the end of our lives, our healthcare costs are very high. We have the choice to lower the cost now, because I can tell you the cost of pursuing a Green New Deal will be far less than the cost of not passing it. And with respect to our brothers and sisters and neighbors that are in agriculture, bring them to the table. Let's hold hearings. Let's add provisions. Let's amend the legislation to accommodate for the just transition and for the encouragement of those industries to grow. And I would also encourage to my colleague on the other side of the aisle that thinks we're trying to ban cows to actually read the resolution and understand that there's nothing to that effect in the legislation. And not only that, but we're trying to invest in these communities and our agricultural workers so that they can enjoy prosperity into the next century.
That was Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Her speech in the House committee hearing has been watched at least 13 million times. We also want to thank Rihanna Gunn-Wright, one of the lead policy writers for the Green New Deal, policy director for the nonprofit New Consensus. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we look at the hearings that are taking place on Boeing, on the Interior Secretary, as well as what happened with Monsanto. Massive settlement, massive case against it. Stay with us.
Let it go, just like the ones that came before. Stones rolling back into the ocean. Shake it off, it was only just a cost. Money, 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 can't buy the ocean.
Stones rolling back into the ocean by Handmade Moments. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to look at how regulatory agencies under the Trump administration have been captured by corporations. On Wednesday, the Senate's Aviation Subcommittee held a hearing on the 2 deadly crashes of Boeing's new 737 MAX jets, where the Federal Aviation Administration defended the agency's reliance on aircraft makers to help certify their own planes for flight. The delegation process is known as the ODA program. This is FAA Acting Head Daniel Elwell.
We have very strict oversight on every participant in an ODA program, and we make sure that they are experts in the field, that they have the appropriate understanding of FAA regs and manuals, they have professional integrity is checked, everything. But to your point, if we had no ODA at all, it would, an estimation, it would require roughly 10,000 more employees and to do that role at the FAA, and about $1.8 billion for our certification office in the FAA.
Boeing has spent more than $70 million on lobbying since 2015. It also contributed to the campaigns of members of the committees that regulate it, including more than $60,000 to the 2018 re-election campaign of Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who is chairman of the Aviation Subcommittee.
This comes as the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources is holding confirmation hearings today on Trump's nominee to head the Interior Department, David Bernhardt, a former oil lobbyist. Meanwhile, a federal jury in California has just ordered Monsanto to pay over $80 million to a cancer survivor whose illness was found to have been partly caused by the herbicide Roundup. For more on these corporate issues, we're joined by Rob Weissman, president of Public Citizen. On Wednesday, the group delivered a poster-sized version of Bernhardt's conflict of interest cheat sheet to lawmakers who will vote on his confirmation and received nearly $1 million in donations from Bernhardt and his former lobbying firm. But we're going to get to that in a minute. We want to start with Boeing. Talk about the significance of this hearing. The deaths of 346 people in 2 airline crashes in the last months from Indonesia to Ethiopia. Boeing's plane found seriously at fault, yet the U.S. was the last to ground the MAX 7 and 8 planes. What did you learn yesterday?
Well, we're seeing more and more evidence of how the FAA, the agency that's supposed to regulate Boeing, is in fact working for Boeing. It's staffed, actually, by Boeing, and it's outsourced its regulatory duties to Boeing. In the clip you played at the top of this show, you have the acting administrator saying, I don't understand. He calls them safety companies, the airlines. He calls them the airplane manufacturers safety companies. I don't understand how they might cut back on safety. It's a pretty big problem when the guy who's in charge of regulating safety can't understand how the manufacturer might cut back on safety. And, of course, he comes from the industry The person who runs the safety division at the FAA did a stint for the lobby association for the aerospace companies. The new guy coming in to replace the acting administrator comes from the airlines.
Delta.
For Delta. So you have this total revolving door problem and a total capture of the agency, maybe as bad as anywhere in government.
So talk about who Stephen Dixon is. Steve Dixon, the former Delta executive who Trump has picked to head the FAA.
Yeah, well, it's exactly part of the same story. So you have different parts of the industry running the FAA. So the results are predictable. They're not going to do their job. And in fact, it's not even clear they understand their job to really do safety and regulate the companies that they're overseeing. They seem to think that their job is to work in collaboration with the companies to do the best they can and actually to promote the industry.
So was Boeing responsible for the deaths of 346 people? How? And what exactly didn't the U.S. regulatory agencies do to prevent this from happening? What was their role?
Right. We're still going to have to learn more. But what seems to be unfolding is that they redesigned the 737. The design required some new kind of software, autopilot software. The autopilot software made errors. The human pilots weren't able to overcome, in many cases, the errors inflicted by the computer software, and the planes crashed. Senator Blumenthal said yesterday at the hearing, he's read reports from many pilots in the United States who had exactly the same problem, but were able to overcome, unlike the pilots in Ethiopia and in Indonesia. So we were pretty lucky, maybe, that it's only been 2 flights.
How long had this been in use, the 737 MAX?
This is relatively new. They've rushed it to the market. So there's still new technology. And it's exactly the case of why you want an independent regulator. They rushed it. They had competition from Airbus. They were under pressure to get it to market quickly, and so they did. And it appears they did so cutting corners on safety.
You are the president and CEO of Public Citizen, which was founded by Ralph Nader. Ralph's grandniece, Samia Stumo, died in the Ethiopia crash. She was one of 346 people in those 2 crashes. Right now, what do you feel has to happen with the FAA? And Dixon is not a done deal, right? He has to be approved by the Senate.
That's right. He'll have to be confirmed. I want to say I knew Samia, Ralph's grandniece, and she's delightful. When we see these regulatory issues, they're often abstract and people maybe don't pay attention to them. What they fail to realize is that actually failed regulation means people are going to die. And when you know the person who died, it changes the whole story for you. It personalizes it and makes it real. And so it's totally heartbreaking. At the FAA, they have outsourced so much of their regulatory oversight to Boeing. There's a real problem about how they can actually do their public duty again. You heard Elwood say, gosh, we would need 10,000 new inspectors. I don't know if they would need 10,000 new inspectors, but they will need more. They don't have the capacity in the agency, so it's going to take some time to rebuild this agency.
Let's move on to Bernhardt. Let's move on to the hearing that's taking place today, the Interior Secretary, and why you've written this open letter.
Well, out of all the Trump appointees, this guy may be the most conflicted one coming in. It's hard to say, but he's in the running for the most conflicted cabinet appointee. He carries around a card listing all of his conflicts of interest and all the companies he's not supposed to work for, because he can't keep track of them. It's more than 2 dozen. On the other hand, it's not really clear why he carries the card around, because he doesn't seem to use it. He is, in fact, working on behalf of the companies that he used to represent, intervening in a lot of decisions of the Department of Interior so far as the number 2 to help companies that he used to work for.
And why do you think Trump chose him to replace Zinke?
Well, you know, the MO at the Trump administration seems to be, if you've got an ethics crisis because someone's forced out, why don't we replace them with an insider corporate lobbyist? That's our solution to the ethics problem. This guy was there number 2. He does know the agency. He's very effective. He's very effective working for the companies that he used to represent. And so he was a natural choice for the Trump administration.
And the Department of Interior is actually looking at a proposal expanding offshore oil drilling, which has happened while he's been there?
Right. So he is involved in efforts on offshore oil drilling. He used to work for the oil and gas industry. He's involved in changes to the Endangered Species Act on behalf of clients he used to work for. He's now intervened in pesticide decisions that would affect the former Dow company, who made $1 million contribution to the Trump administration, and is close with the administration.
Is it true Bernhardt ordered some furloughed workers back to work during the government shutdown to push through oil and natural gas drilling permits, offshore drilling permits in the Alaska Refuge?
I don't know if Bernhardt was the one who ordered it, but that's definitely occurred, yes.
So what are you demanding right now?
Well, our position is this is not a guy who's qualified to run the Department of Interior, and he shouldn't be approved.
What about pesticides?
Well, he's intervened in recently. The New York Times just reported in 2 instances of pesticides, highly toxic pesticides. Big study inside the Department of Interior found that the use of these pesticides would jeopardize more than 1,000 endangered species. So the conclusion is, okay, we got to deal with this problem. He's not a guy who knows pesticides, but he intervened. He sort of swooped into this process and said, okay, never mind. We're not doing that. We're not going to take any regulatory action. Business as usual.
So his move benefited major pesticide makers, including FMC Corporation and Dow AgroScience. Dow, a major donor to President Trump. I think they gave like $1 million to his inaugural committee.
That's exactly right.
Finally, the latest court decision that just came down around Monsanto and Roundup, its pesticide.
So a huge decision in a case brought by a man who has cancer, still living with cancer, alleging that it was caused by Roundup. And the jury came in and said, yes, it caused it, and gave huge damage, not just for the disease that he's been inflicted with, but as a punitive damage to punish Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, for what the jury believed was covering up of the evidence of the carcinogenicity of Roundup for many, many years.
Will this award happen?
Well, you don't know. I mean, Bayer Monsanto will certainly appeal this decision. But in this case, it was designated by the judge as a bellwether case because there's so many cases in line. And the judge is saying, look, we want to see how the first few trials go, and then we're going to make a decision about how we should look at the rest of these cases. It's going to really strengthen the hand of the other people who have claims to negotiate a fair settlement from Bayer Monsanto.
Rob Weissman, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Robert Weissman is president of Public Citizen. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Biased, uncovering the hidden prejudice that shapes what we see, think, and do. Stay with us.
I'm tired of human lives turned into hashtags and prayer hands. I'm tired of watching these murderers get off while we bury the lost love. Innocent brothers and sisters, it's time to wake up, wake up, wake up. Brothers and sisters, it's time to say something, do something, make them. I wonder how many black lives, how many black lives, how many heartbeats turned into flat lines. How many black lives, how many black lives does it take to wake a change? Does it take to wake a change? Does it take to wake a change? We can't let them die in vain. Will it take to wake a change? I cannot wait and be quiet.
How Many by Miguel. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We end the show with the news out of Virginia, where avowed neo-Nazi James Alex Fields pleaded guilty Wednesday to 29 counts of hate crimes in a federal court for plowing his car into a crowd of anti-racist protesters in Charlottesville in August 2017. As part of the deal, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. Last December, a Virginia jury sentenced Fields to life in prison for his violent act, which killed anti-fascist protester Heather Heyer and injured 28 others at a counter-protest of the white supremacist Unite the Right rally.
We turn now to a new book that addresses the tragic events in Charlottesville, as well as the rising number of race-based mass shootings, hate crimes, police shootings of unarmed men in the past several years. It also looks at cases of discrimination against African Americans for simply sitting in coffee shops or trying to vacation at Airbnb-hosted homes. Biased, uncovering the hidden prejudice that shapes what we see, think, and do, examines how implicit bias impacts everything from hate crimes to microaggressions in the workplace, school, and community, and what we can do about it. The book's author, Professor Jennifer Eberhardt, writes, quote, "In Charlottesville, bias ripped through the pact we've made to pretend that blatant bigotry is a relic of the past. In truth, bias has been biding its time in an implicit world, in a place where we need not acknowledge it to ourselves or to others, even as it touches our soul and drives our behavior." We're joined right now by Jennifer Eberhardt, professor of psychology at Stanford University, recipient of the 2014 MacArthur Genius Grant. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor. It's great to have you with us. Congratulations on the release of your book this week. Brian Stevenson, who spearheaded the Legacy Museum, where we just went in Montgomery, Alabama, calls your book groundbreaking. You know, the subtitle of Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do, is hardly relates to Charlottesville in the sense that hidden prejudice was not the issue there.
That's right.
But connect the two. Talk about what you thought as you watched what unfolded at the University of Virginia.
Well, I mean, so this Unite the Right rally was the largest public gathering of white supremacists in a generation. I think it took a lot of people by surprise. They were there to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee from, the core of the city, and so they were there to start a race war, according to them. And there were counter protesters there who showed up to try to protect the city and protect their values. And lots of clashes during that rally, and a lot of I think, concern about the role of the police with that, and just not standing back and not intervening as people were being beaten and taunted and so forth. And it kind of, led to a lot of people in the city of Charlottesville and on the UVA campus to, sort of think about how this happened and why it happened, and why was this, the sort of ground zero for that movement.
And how does that tie in, such explicit manifest racism, with your idea of unconscious, implicit bias?
Well, I think it ties in if we, I think, a couple things. I think people think a lot about, sort of bigotry rising up when we have economic insecurity or instability. But there's research showing that it's not just that. It's also the changing racial demographics in this country, and that makes people fearful, that makes them nervous. There's research by Jennifer Richardson and Maureen Craig showing that just reminding white Americans of that changing racial dynamic or the changing racial landscape can lead them to, express more prejudice against people of color, to feel like discrimination against whites is on the rise, and that's the big problem. And to also endorse more politically conservative views and policies. So it's not just the economic issue why we get this move towards more explicit bias or old-fashioned racism. It's also this concern about losing your presence and your status in society.
Now, President Trump did not tweet about Fields yesterday, pleading guilty to a hate crime. But this morning he did tweet. He tweeted, FBI and DOJ to review the outrageous Jussie Smollett case in Chicago. It is an embarrassment to our nation. This has captured the media over the last few days. Right. The Chicago prosecutors dropping the 16 felony charges against Jussie Smollett for arranging a hate crime against him. That's what they charged him with.
Yes.
He did some community service, forfeited his $10,000 bond, and they've dropped all the charges. So Trump tweeted about this, right. But on this issue of the white supremacist killer, he didn't say a word. Can you make a segue from one to the other and what your thoughts are on Smollett?
Right. So, as a social scientist, I'm not, looking at an isolated case and sort of trying to make claims about that one way or the other. I think that case is still unfolding, too, and so I'm not sure, how all of that will end up. But what I could say is that we know that our leadership matters in terms of, people's willingness to express a bias. I think also the social norms matter. There's a lot of research on that, actually. So when social norms shift so that we're becoming sort of less egalitarian, that leads sort of individuals, that gives them license to express more bias. And so it's not just about a choice that we're making as individuals to be biased or not. It's also about the social climate. We're social beings, and so we're sensitive to what the social climate is. And to the extent that the social climate is moving away from being egalitarian, that can feed our bias. That can lead implicit biases actually to become explicit because there is a context for that. There's a way in which that's welcomed. And so those social norms can lead us to actually become more prejudiced and to act on those prejudices.
Well, can you explain what goes into constituting an implicit bias?
So implicit bias can be defined as the beliefs and the feelings that we have about social groups that can influence our decision-making and our actions, even when we're unaware of it. And so it's sort of biases that exist despite how we see ourselves as egalitarians, say, or biases that can exist despite our intentions and our motivations to act otherwise.
You begin your book, Biased, with the story of your 5-year-old son.
Yes.
Tell us about what happened.
So we were on a plane together, and, he's 5, and so he's looking around and just really excited about being on an airplane with Mom, and so he's checking everybody out, and he sees this guy, and he says, "Hey, that guy looks like Daddy." And, and I look at the guy, first of all, he doesn't look anything at all like Daddy. And it turns out that he was the only black guy on the plane. And so I'm thinking, okay, my son obviously thinks that all black people look alike, right? So I'm going to try to have a conversation with him about that. But before I could have that conversation, he looks up at me and he says, "I hope he doesn't rob the plane." And I said, "What? What did you say?" And he said it again. "Well, I hope he doesn't rob the plane." And I said, "Everett, why would you say that? And Daddy wouldn't rob a plane." And he said, yeah, I know. And I said, "Well, why would you say that?" And he looked at me with this really sad face. And he said, "I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I was thinking that."
You later talk about your son being a target of racial bias.
Yeah, I do. So that son, the 5-year-old, is now 17. And so he's growing into, a man, a young man. And people sort of experience, him with the same, kind of his presence triggers those same kinds of thoughts. And he's becoming aware of that over time and aware that he could be seen as a threat in the eyes of others.
Well, is there any way to overcome implicit bias?
Well, it's not something that we can just overcome and get rid of, completely. And that's something that I write about in the book, Bias, that I think we keep thinking we'll get to the day where we'll be done with this. We don't have to worry about it. And the fact is that we have to be sort of constantly vigilant around it. So even when we can, we can push it down and with our laws, and we can push it down with our social norms, and we can be motivated, right, to work on it. it's something that we have to be vigilant about all the time, because it could spring up again. The social conditions can, allow it to surface again. So there's some situations that really sort of promote bias more than others. And as social scientists, we know a lot about those situations. So to the extent that we can manage those situations, we can, the better, basically.
I don't need you to tell me who you're going to vote for in 2020. Okay. But I do want to ask you to comment on the B-Boys. That's Bernie, Biden, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and Beto. Okay, they're called the B-Boys. Okay. They're all white men. There are a number of people of color and women who are running for president, but they are getting much more attention, these 4 white men. Your thoughts? What does the media need to learn? We have 30 seconds.
Well, I think maybe we can have a discussion about who people think of as leaders, right? Sort of who do we associate with leaders? And leadership tends to be associated with men, and leadership tends to be associated with people who are white and powerful. And so to the extent that you have an inconsistency there between what a person looks like and what social group they belong to and what they're trying to do, that's hard for for us to wrap our minds around.
Well, we're going to leave it there, but we're going to do part 2 and put it online at DemocracyNow.org. Jennifer Eberhardt, professor of psychology at Stanford University, author of the new book, Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes That We See, Think, and Do. Thank you.